"Take it," Lily said, stepping back as the rain poured down around her. "You need it more than I do." The man standing in front of her looked utterly bewildered, his sharp blue eyes narrowing as if he couldn't quite believe she was serious. The yellow cab idled by the curb, its windshield wipers swiping furiously, while other frustrated New Yorkers fought for taxis up and down the street. "You were here first," he pointed out, his deep voice cutting through the storm. It wasn't just the voice, it was the way he held himself, like someone who wasn't used to being told no, someone who expected the world to bend to his will. Lily shrugged, hugging her coat tighter around herself, even though it was already soaked through. "And yet, I'm still telling you to take it." The man hesitated for a second longer, then with a small nod, he stepped into the cab, but just before the door shut, he leaned out. "What's your name?" She blinked, caught off guard. "Lily Carter." The door closed, and just like that, the cab disappeared into the traffic. Lily let out a slow breath, shivering as the icy rain dripped down the back of her neck. She probably should have kept the taxi, her shoes were already ruined, and she had a long walk to her tiny apartment. But the guy had looked like he was in a hurry, and she wasn't the kind of person who could ignore that. Little did she know, the man she had just given up her taxi for was Nicholas Hale, one of the wealthiest men in the city. The next morning, Lily walked into the coffee shop where she worked, shaking the damp from her hair. The bell jingled as she stepped behind the counter, tying on her apron. "You look like a drowned rat," her coworker Jen teased, handing her a towel. "Thanks for the confidence boost," Lily said, drying her face. "You're late," Lily groaned. "Don't remind me." "I gave up my cab last night to some guy, and then the subway was a disaster. My shoes may never recover." Jen snorted. "Only you would do something like that." Lily shrugged, brushing off the conversation as she turned to the espresso machine. The morning rush was already picking up, and she quickly fell into the rhythm of making lattes and handing out pastries. And then the door opened, and the entire coffee shop seemed to shift. A man walked in tall, sharply dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His presence commanded the space, like he was used to people noticing him. But it wasn't just anyone, it was him. Lily froze, her hand tightening around the coffee cup she was holding. Nicholas Hale. The man she had given her taxi to, what was he doing here? He stepped up to the counter, looking directly at her. "Lily Carter, right?" Her heart stuttered. Yeah." A slow smile tugged at the corner of his lips, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. "I owe you a coffee," she blinked. "What?" "Last night. You gave me your taxi, and now you're standing in front of me making coffee for other people. Feels like I should return the favor." Lily stared at him, trying to make sense of what was happening. You don't have to do that." "I insist." Jen, who had been watching the interaction with wide eyes, nudged Lily. "Lily, for the love of all things caffeinated, take the free coffee." Nicholas chuckled, slipping a black credit card onto the counter. "And add a week's worth of tips for your trouble." Lily gaped at him. "That's insane, I can't take that." "You can," he said smoothly, "and you will." Jen practically shoved the card through the register before Lily could protest again. Lily narrowed her eyes at him. "Are you always this persistent?" Nicholas looked amused. "Always." And just like that, Lily Carter's life took a turn she never saw coming. Because Nicholas Hale wasn't just a man who took her taxi. He was a millionaire who was about to turn her world upside down. Lily spent the rest of her shift moving on autopilot, her mind stuck on the impossibility of the morning. Nicholas Hale, wealthy, powerful, and far too charming for his own good, had not only remembered her name but had gone out of his way to track her down. All because of a taxi. Her fingers fumbled while wiping down the espresso machine, the conversation replaying in her head. The way he had looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and amusement, as if he wasn't used to people turning down his generosity. And the tip an entire week's worth. It was ridiculous, unnecessary. Yet, Jen had all but forced her to accept it, and now Lily was left trying to make sense of it all. By the time her shift ended, she had almost convinced herself that she wouldn't see him again. That it had just been a moment of fleeting intrigue for a man who probably forgot people as quickly as he met them. She was wrong. The next morning he was back. This time he wasn't alone. Lily had just finished handing a customer their order when the door swung open, and in walked Nicholas Hale accompanied by a man in an equally expensive suit. The newcomer had a sharp, assessing gaze, and carried himself with the same air of authority that Nicholas did. The coffee shop, usually loud with the morning rush, seemed to hush slightly at their arrival. Lily stiffened, gripping the counter as Nicholas approached with effortless confidence. "Good morning, Lily," he said, his deep voice cutting through the quiet hum of the shop. She forced herself to breathe. "You're back. Did you think I wouldn't be?" His lips twitched as if amused by the idea. She folded her arms. "Most people don't go to this much trouble over a taxi." The man beside him chuckled. "You don't know Nicholas very well, then." Nicholas shot him a look before turning back to her. "Lily, this is Daniel Pierce, my business partner, and an insufferable pain, but I tolerate him." Daniel smirked. "Charmed." Lily raised an eyebrow. "So, what brings the two of you here? Or do millionaires just make a habit of frequenting tiny coffee shops?" Nicholas leaned against the counter, his gaze locked onto hers. "I wanted to see if yesterday was a fluke, if you'd actually take my money and never think about me again." She frowned. "It wasn't about the money, Nicholas." "Good," he said smoothly. "Because I have a proposition for you," Lily blinked. "A what?" Daniel cut in before she could protest. "We're looking for someone to handle a private event this weekend." "Nicholas insists you're the right person for the job." Her confusion only deepened. "I make coffee, I'm not an event planner." Nicholas's expression didn't waver. "But you handle people. You're quick on your feet, and more importantly, you don't seem particularly impressed by wealth, which makes you perfect for what I need." Lily narrowed her eyes. "And what exactly do you need?" "A hostess," he said simply. "Someone who won't be intimidated by the guest list. Someone who can keep things running smoothly without tripping over themselves trying to impress the wrong people." She stared at him. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he countered. "You gave up your taxi without hesitation. You didn't recognize me, which means you weren't trying to impress me. And you refused to take the tip until your coworker forced your hand." A slow smile spread across his face. "That tells me everything I need to know." Lily hesitated, skepticism warring with curiosity. It was tempting the money alone would probably be more than she made in a month, but working an event for people like Nicholas. She wasn't sure she belonged in that world. "What's in it for you?" she asked finally. Nicholas's gaze darkened slightly, as if she had unknowingly touched on something deeper. "I need someone I can trust in that room." For a moment, there was something unspoken between them, something that had nothing to do with taxis or coffee. Daniel cleared his throat. "Before you overthink it, just know the pay will be more than worth your time." Lily exhaled slowly. "I don't know." Nicholas studied her carefully. "Say yes, Lily." The way he said it, the quiet command in his voice, made her pulse quicken. Against her better judgment, she nodded. "Fine, I'll do it." Nicholas's smile was slow, victorious. "Good choice." And just like that, Lily's world shifted again, this time into something even more dangerous. Lily spent the next 2 days regretting her decision. She had agreed too fast, caught up in the strange pull of Nicholas Hale's presence. Now she was second-guessing everything. She wasn't the kind of woman who attended lavish events, let alone worked them. Her life was simple paycheck to paycheck, long shifts at the coffee shop, and dreams that had long since been placed on the back burner. And yet here she was, standing in front of a floor-length mirror in a borrowed black dress, trying to convince herself she belonged. The dress was sleek, elegant but not over the top. Jen had all but shoved it into her arms when she explained the situation, insisting that she couldn't show up looking like she had just stepped off a coffee shop shift. "You're going to be surrounded by the richest people in the city," Jen had said. "At least pretend you belong." Belonging, that was the problem, wasn't it? A sharp knock on her apartment door pulled her out of her thoughts. She took a steadying breath before opening it, only to find herself staring up at Nicholas Hale himself. She had expected a driver, maybe even Daniel, but not him. His sharp blue eyes swept over her, and for a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face, something unreadable. Then, just as quickly, he masked it, giving her a small nod. "You clean up well," he remarked. Lily crossed her arms. "Is this part of the job, you personally picking me up?" Nicholas smirked. "I like to ensure my employees arrive on time." "Employees," she repeated, narrowing her eyes. "That's what I am." "For tonight," he said smoothly. "Shall we?" She let out a slow breath before stepping outside. A sleek black car was waiting at the curb, polished to perfection. She hesitated for only a moment before sliding inside, Nicholas following closely behind. The ride was silent at first, the city lights flickering past. Lily kept her hands folded in her lap, stealing a glance at the man beside her. He was composed, unreadable, but there was something about the way his fingers tapped lightly against his knee that told her he wasn't as unaffected as he seemed. Finally, she broke the silence. "So what exactly am I supposed to be doing tonight?" Nicholas turned to face her. "Mingling, keeping an eye on things, making sure no one causes trouble," she frowned. "And why me?" His gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. "Because I trust you." The words sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. Before she could respond, the car pulled up in front of a towering building, its glass exterior reflecting the city around it. A line of luxury cars stretched down the block, and an elegant red carpet led up the steps to an entrance guarded by men in black suits. Lily swallowed. Nicholas stepped out first, offering her his hand. She hesitated for only a second before taking it, the warmth of his palm against hers sending a jolt through her system. The moment they stepped inside, the world shifted. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over the vast ballroom. Servers in crisp white shirts moved seamlessly through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and whispered conversations, laughter mingling with the soft hum of live music. Lily felt like an imposter. Nicholas, however, moved through the room like he owned it because, in many ways, he probably did. People turned to greet him, offering polite smiles and firm handshakes. He introduced her simply as Lily, without explanation, without fanfare. She was grateful. As the evening progressed, she watched everything with careful eyes. The guests were exactly what she had expected: polished, powerful, and utterly oblivious to anyone who wasn't in their world. She caught snippets of conversations about investments, real estate, and business empires. And then she noticed something: a man near the bar watching Nicholas too closely. He wasn't mingling, wasn't engaging, he was observing. Lily's instincts kicked in. She made her way toward Nicholas, who was in the middle of a conversation with Daniel and an older man in a navy suit. Without thinking, she touched his arm lightly, just enough to get his attention. He turned, brow arching. She leaned in, lowering her voice. "There's someone watching you." Nicholas's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. "Where?" She subtly nodded toward the bar. He didn't look immediately, he was too controlled for that, but she felt the way his muscles tensed beneath her touch. "Stay close," he murmured. Lily wasn't sure why those two words sent a thrill through her, but they did. The rest of the night passed in a blur of conversations and careful glances. Nicholas never acknowledged the man directly, but she knew he had noticed. By the time the event was winding down, he finally turned to her, something unreadable in his expression. "You were right," he admitted. "He wasn't supposed to be here." Lily swallowed. "Who was he?" Nicholas hesitated. Then, with a small smirk, he said, "Not someone you need to worry about." But something in his eyes told her otherwise, and for the first time since she had met him, Lily realized Nicholas Hale had secrets. Dangerous ones. Lily had spent most of the night watching Nicholas, but now, as she sat in the back of his car, she realized he had been watching her too. The air between them was different now, charged, heavier. Maybe it was because she had noticed something no one else had, or maybe it was because Nicholas wasn't used to people looking out for him. Either way, he was staring at her in a way that made her pulse quicken. "You didn't have to stay," he said finally, breaking the silence. She turned to him, frowning. "What do you mean?" He studied her, his expression unreadable. "When you saw that man watching me, you could have walked away, pretended you didn't notice." Lily hesitated. What was she supposed to say to that? That she had stayed because something about him intrigued her. Because despite the expensive suits and the effortless confidence, there was something guarded about him, something that made her want to look deeper. Instead, she shrugged. "I guess I'm just not the type to ignore things." Nicholas's lips quirked, but there was something almost contemplative in his gaze. He seemed about to say something else when the car slowed in front of her apartment. The moment broke. Lily reached for the door handle, but before she could step out, Nicholas spoke again. "Lily." She turned back, waiting. His voice was quieter this time. "Be careful." She frowned. "Why would I need to be careful?" There was something unspoken in his expression, something that told her last night wasn't just about an unwanted guest at his event. But just as quickly he masked it, giving her a small nod. "Good night, Lily." She hesitated for a moment longer, then stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at her skin. The sleek black vehicle disappeared into the night, leaving her standing on the sidewalk, heart hammering in her chest. She had a feeling this wasn't over, and she was right. The next morning, Lily arrived at the coffee shop, expecting her life to return to normal. She was wrong. Jen was already behind the counter, grinning like she had been waiting for Lily to walk in. "You have a visitor," Lily frowned. "A visitor?" Jen nodded toward the corner of the shop. Lily followed her gaze and froze. Nicholas Hale. Sitting at a small table, dressed in another impossibly expensive suit, sipping a black coffee like he belonged there. She exhaled slowly, steeling herself before making her way over to him. "You know, most people just text if they want to see someone again." Nicholas glanced up, his lips twitching in amusement. "And yet here I am." She folded her arms. "Why?" He set his cup down, studying her. "Because I have another proposition for you." Lily narrowed her eyes. "The last one nearly got me involved in something I don't understand." He leaned back in his chair, considering her. "And yet you're still standing here." She hated that he was right. With a sigh, she pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "All right, let's hear it." Nicholas smirked. "I need you to pretend to be my girlfriend." Lily choked on air. "I'm sorry, what?" He didn't even flinch. "Just for a little while, it's nothing serious." She stared at him like he had lost his mind. "You can't be serious." "I am." Lily ran a hand down her face. "Why on earth would you need me to pretend to be your girlfriend?" Nicholas exhaled, a rare sign of frustration flickering across his face. "There are people watching me. People who want to see me fail. If they think I'm distracted, they'll use it against me." She frowned, trying to piece it together. "So, what?" "You want me to be a distraction." "A shield," he corrected. "If they think I'm in a stable relationship, they'll be less likely to dig into other parts of my life." Lily leaned back, crossing her arms. "And what do I get out of this?" Nicholas's gaze darkened slightly. "A lot more than you think." The way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. She should have said no. She should have walked away. But something about the way he was looking at her, the way he seemed to trust her in a way he didn't trust anyone else, made her hesitate. Lily wasn't sure what she was stepping into, but she had a feeling there was no turning back now. Lily stared at Nicholas, waiting for some sign that he was joking. That this was one of those absurd moments where rich people did things just because they could. But his expression remained steady, unwavering. "You need me to pretend to be your girlfriend," she said slowly, as if saying it out loud might make it sound less ridiculous. It didn't. "Yes." She let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Nicholas, that's insane. You could have literally anyone play this role." "I don't want just anyone," he said, voice even. "I want you." Her stomach twisted at that. The way he said it, as though it was a fact rather than a choice, sent an unsettling warmth through her. She shook her head. "I don't belong in your world. I don't even know what your world is." His gaze darkened slightly, as if she had unknowingly touched on something deeper. "You're right, you don't. Which is exactly why you're perfect." She frowned, confused. "I need someone who isn't part of this someone they won't expect," he explained. "If I suddenly show up with a woman from my social circle, it'll be obvious that it's a move. But you're unexpected." Lily exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. "So what?" "I just follow you around, smile at the right moments, and pretend we're madly in love," Nicholas smirked. "Essentially." She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "And why exactly are people watching you?" He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "There are people who would rather see me fall than succeed," he admitted. "Business rivals, former allies. If they think I have a weakness, they'll use it." Lily narrowed her eyes. "And you think a fake girlfriend will make you look stronger?" "It'll make me look untouchable," he corrected. She studied him, trying to gauge just how deep this went. Nicholas Hale wasn't just some wealthy businessman with a minor inconvenience. No, this was something bigger, something more dangerous, and she wasn't sure she wanted to be anywhere near it. But then he said the words that changed everything. "I'll pay you," Lily sucked in a breath. "Enough to cover your rent for the next 6 months. Enough to make sure you don't have to work double shifts at the coffee shop." Her heart pounded. It wasn't just about the money, though that part was tempting. It was the idea of being free, even for a little while. Free from the constant worry of bills, of struggling to keep her head above water. Nicholas watched her carefully, as if he knew exactly what was going through her mind. "And what happens if I say no?" she asked. His jaw tightened slightly. "Then I find another way." Lily exhaled slowly. She should walk away, but she didn't. Instead, she found herself nodding, her voice quieter than she expected. "All right. I'll do it." Nicholas's lips curved just slightly. "Good." She didn't realize it then, but in that moment, she had just stepped into something far more dangerous than she ever could have imagined. The first time Lily saw herself in the world of Nicholas Hale, it was like stepping onto a movie set. The gala was held at one of the most exclusive venues in the city, a towering glass building that shimmered against the night sky. Inside, the room was filled with the kind of people she had only ever seen in magazines: men in tailored suits, women in gowns that probably cost more than her entire year's salary. Nicholas had given her a dress, not loaned, given. It was an elegant floor-length gown, deep midnight blue, the fabric smooth and cool against her skin. When she had protested, he had simply said, "You're my girlfriend now, you have to look the part." Now, standing by his side as they entered the grand ballroom, she felt like an imposter. People turned to them immediately, curious, assessing looks. Lily felt the weight of their gazes, the silent questions lingering in the air. Nicholas's hand found her waist, the touch firm, grounding. He leaned in slightly, murmuring against her ear, "Relax." Her breath hitched, but she forced herself to nod. A woman approached them, tall and elegant, her sharp eyes flicking over Lily before turning to Nicholas with a knowing smirk. "Nicholas," she purred, "and who is this?" He didn't hesitate. Lily Carter, my girlfriend. The woman's brows lifted ever so slightly. Girlfriend, Lily offered a tight smile. It's nice to meet you. The woman didn't return the sentiment. Instead, she turned her attention back to Nicholas. I suppose I'll be seeing you at the board meeting next week. You will, he said smoothly. The woman gave Lily one last, lingering glance before slipping away. Lily exhaled. She hates me, Nicholas smirked. She hates everyone. Lily wasn't sure she believed that. The night continued in a blur of introductions and champagne, Nicholas always keeping her close. And for the first time, she saw it the way people moved around him, the careful way they spoke. Power. Nicholas Hale wasn't just wealthy, he was powerful, and that, more than anything, made him dangerous. As the evening wore on, she found herself watching him more closely. The way he spoke, the way he controlled a conversation without ever dominating it, he was careful, strategic, and then she felt it. A presence, someone watching them. She stiffened slightly, her fingers tightening around her champagne flute. Nicholas noticed immediately. What is it? He murmured. She didn't look at him, didn't want to draw attention. We're being watched. Nicholas's expression didn't change, but she felt it the way his hand on her waist tightened ever so slightly. Where? Near the exit, she said softly. Dark suit. Gray tie. Nicholas's jaw clenched, Lily swallowed. Who is he? Nicholas didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to her, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. To anyone watching, it would look like nothing more than an intimate moment between lovers. But his next words sent a chill down her spine. Someone who doesn't belong here. Lily's pulse hammered. She wanted to ask more, to demand an explanation, but she didn't get the chance. Because in that moment, the man in the gray tie turned and disappeared into the crowd. And Nicholas Hale, for the first time that night, looked truly unsettled. Lily kept her expression neutral, but her pulse pounded in her throat. Nicholas was good at masking his emotions. His face was unreadable, his posture unbothered, but she could feel the tension radiating off him like a live wire. Whoever that man was, he wasn't just some random guest. Nicholas exhaled slowly, his fingers tracing absent-mindedly along the stem of his champagne flute. He didn't look at her, didn't say anything at first, but she could tell his mind was working, calculating. Then, just as quickly as the shift had come, he turned to her, his usual smirk sliding back into place like a well-worn mask. You're better at this than I expected, he murmured. Lily arched an eyebrow. At what? Playing pretend? His gaze lingered on her, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. Not just that. Before she could press him further, a man approached, all charm and practiced ease. He was older, maybe mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair and an expensive watch that gleamed under the chandeliers. The moment Nicholas noticed him, his grip on Lily's waist tightened. Nicholas, the man greeted smoothly, his eyes sharp despite his easy smile. It's been too long. Nicholas's expression remained polite but distant. Not long enough. The man chuckled as if Nicholas's coldness amused him, then his gaze flickered to Lily, assessing. And who is this? Nicholas didn't hesitate. Lily Carter. My girlfriend. She was getting used to hearing those words, but somehow they still sent a strange thrill through her. The man extended a hand, and Lily shook it, though something about him put her on edge. Richard Calloway, he said. I do business with Nicholas, or at least I try to. Lily shot Nicholas a sideways glance, but his expression gave nothing away. Richard's smile widened, but there was something in his eyes that unsettled her. You must be special, he mused. Nicholas doesn't usually entertain distractions. Lily stiffened, but before she could respond, Nicholas cut in smoothly. Lily isn't a distraction. Richard's eyes gleamed with something she didn't understand. Of course not. Then, with a knowing smirk, he added, Be careful, Miss Carter. Standing too close to Nicholas Hale has consequences. Lily barely had time to process the words before Richard walked away, disappearing into the crowd. She turned to Nicholas. What the hell was that supposed to mean? Nicholas exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. Ignore him. Kind of hard to do when he's warning me like I just walked into a trap. Nicholas's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Daniel appeared beside them, his usual smirk absent. We have a problem, he said quietly. Nicholas's expression darkened. I know. Daniel's gaze flickered to Lily, considering, then surprisingly he nodded. She stays. Lily crossed her arms. Wow, thanks for the vote of confidence. Daniel didn't smile. This isn't a joke, Carter. Nicholas sighed, as if making a decision he didn't want to. Then he turned to her, his voice lower now, more serious. I need you to trust me. Lily hesitated. She wasn't sure she did, but she also wasn't sure she wanted to walk away, not yet. Nicholas studied her for a moment longer, then gently took her hand. Come with me. She let him lead her through the crowd, past glittering chandeliers and murmured conversations, until they reached a private hallway away from the noise. Once they were alone, Nicholas turned to her, his expression unreadable. That man you saw tonight, the one watching us, he wasn't just some guest. And neither was Richard Calloway. Lily's stomach tightened. Who are they? Nicholas hesitated. Then, quietly, he said, people who want what I have. She exhaled slowly. And what is that exactly? His lips quirked, but there was no humor in it. Power, Lily swallowed. So what, you think they're trying to use me against you? Nicholas's gaze darkened. I don't think I know. Her breath caught. This wasn't just about some fake relationship anymore. It was something much, much bigger. Lily's pulse pounded in her ears as Nicholas's words settled over her. I don't think. I know. She had stepped into something far more dangerous than she had realized. This wasn't just about pretending to be Nicholas's girlfriend for the sake of appearances. There were people watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. And now, by association, they were watching her too. She took a slow breath, forcing herself to stay calm. So what happens now? Nicholas studied her, his sharp blue eyes unreadable. Then, his jaw tightened slightly. Now, I make sure they know you're not an easy target. Before she could ask what that meant, he pulled her closer, his arms sliding around her waist with a quiet confidence that sent a shiver through her. It was a careful, calculated move, but when he leaned in, whispering against her ear, it felt anything but staged. Trust me, he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. Lily had no idea if she did, but she nodded anyway. Nicholas straightened, his face shifting effortlessly back into the mask of control he wore so well. He took her hand, leading her back into the ballroom with the kind of ease that made it impossible to tell anything was wrong. And that was when she realized he had done this before. Controlled a situation, shifted the narrative. This was his world. She just didn't know if she wanted to be a part of it. The night stretched on with forced smiles and carefully measured conversations. Nicholas didn't leave her side, his presence a silent but steady shield. It should have made her feel safer, but all it did was remind her that she was now involved in something she didn't fully understand. By the time the gala finally ended, exhaustion tugged at her limbs. Nicholas led her out into the cool night air, where his car was already waiting. She hesitated before stepping inside. Nicholas turned to her, his expression softer now that they were alone. Lily. She looked up at him, her heart still unsteady. I don't know what I just signed up for. His gaze searched hers, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. You signed up for me. The words sent an unexpected warmth through her, but she pushed it aside. That man, Richard, he warned me. He said standing too close to you has consequences. Nicholas's jaw tightened. He's right. Lily swallowed hard. Then why did you bring me into this? Something in his expression shifted, like he hadn't expected the question, like he wasn't sure how to answer it. Then, after a long pause, he said quietly, "Because I trust you." It was such a simple statement, but it hit her harder than she expected. Nicholas Hale, a man who controlled everything around him, trusted her. And for some reason, that made walking away even harder. The ride back to her apartment was quiet. Nicholas didn't push her to talk, and for that, she was grateful. She needed time to process, to understand what this meant for her, for them. When the car finally pulled up outside her building, she turned to him, hesitating. "This isn't just business for you, is it?" Nicholas's gaze locked onto hers. "No," her breath caught. She should have left it at that. She should have stepped out of the car and gone inside, put distance between herself and whatever this was turning into. But she didn't. Instead, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his. Nicholas exhaled slowly, his hand turning so that their palms pressed together, warm and steady. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "What happens now?" Nicholas's lips curved slightly, but there was something almost resigned in his expression. "Now," he leaned in just slightly, his voice lower, rougher. "Now I make sure no one ever touches what's mine." Lily's breath hitched, because she wasn't sure if he was still talking about business, or if he was talking about her. Lily didn't know how it had happened, how she had gone from a barista working double shifts to standing at the center of Nicholas Hale's world. But there she was, caught in a storm she hadn't seen coming, her heart racing every time he looked at her, like she was something worth protecting. Days passed in a blur of whispered conversations and stolen glances. Nicholas kept her close, his presence a quiet but undeniable force in her life. He had promised to keep her safe, but he never explained from what. And maybe she should have pushed for answers, should have demanded to know what she had stepped into. But she didn't. Because somewhere along the way, it had stopped feeling like a game. Somewhere along the way, Nicholas Hale had stopped being just a man she was helping, and had become something else entirely. She realized it on a cold evening in his penthouse, the city glittering outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Nicholas had insisted she stay there, claiming it was safer. She had fought him on it at first, but in the end, she had relented. And now, she wasn't sure how she had ever believed she could resist him. He was standing by the window, his tie loosened, his shirt unbuttoned just enough to reveal the hint of his collarbone. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before. As if carrying the weight of his world was starting to wear on him. Lily hesitated before stepping closer. "Nicholas." He glanced at her, and for a moment something flickered in his gaze, something raw, something fragile. She swallowed. "You don't have to do all of this alone," Nicholas exhaled, turning away as if he couldn't afford to let her see the cracks in his armor. "I always have," Lily frowned. "Maybe that's the problem." Silence stretched between them, thick with something unspoken. Then finally he turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "Why are you still here?" The question caught her off guard. "What?" "You could have walked away," he said quietly. "You still can." She searched his face, trying to understand what he was really asking, and then she realized Nicholas Hale wasn't just offering her an out. He was afraid she would take it. Lily's chest tightened. She stepped closer, closing the space between them, her fingers brushing against his. "I don't want to walk away." His breath hitched just slightly. And then, before she could second-guess herself, she reached up, cupping his face in her hands. The tension in his shoulders melted, his eyes darkening as he leaned into her touch. "Lily." She shook her head. "Stop pushing me away." Something in him broke then. He closed the distance between them, his lips crashing against hers in a kiss that left her breathless. It wasn't careful. It wasn't controlled. It was raw, desperate, as if he had spent too long holding back and couldn't anymore. Lily clung to him, her fingers tangling in his hair, her heart pounding as he pulled her closer, like he was afraid she might disappear. But she wasn't going anywhere, not now. Maybe not ever. After that night, everything changed. Nicholas no longer kept his distance. He no longer treated their arrangement like a business deal. He touched her without hesitation, his hand finding hers in crowded rooms, his lips brushing against her temple when he thought no one was looking. When they were alone, he pulled her into his arms without needing a reason, resting his forehead against hers as if she was the only thing keeping him grounded. And Lily let herself fall. She had spent so much of her life being careful, never expecting too much, never letting herself dream of something she couldn't have. But Nicholas made it impossible to be careful. He made her feel like she belonged somewhere she never thought she would, and that terrified her more than anything, because she knew what happened when people like them fell in love. They either soared or they crashed, and she wasn't sure which one they were headed for, but God, she hoped it was the first. Lily hadn't realized how deeply she had fallen until she saw the way Nicholas looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. It wasn't just admiration or desire, it was something more. Something that made her breath catch and her heart stutter. She saw it in the way his fingers grazed hers absent-mindedly when they were alone, in the way his gaze softened when she laughed. He had started letting down his walls, bit by bit, allowing her to see the man beneath the pristine suits and calculated decisions, and she loved him for it. The thought terrified her. Love wasn't something she had ever allowed herself to consider, not when life had always been about survival. But Nicholas made her believe, even if she didn't want to. They spent nights wrapped in each other, tangled in silk sheets and whispered promises. He took her to places she had only ever dreamed of: rooftop restaurants with candlelit tables, private beaches where the world felt impossibly still. Yet none of it compared to the quiet moments when it was just them, curled up on the couch, his fingers tracing lazy circles on her skin. She should have been happy. But something lingered in the air, something unspoken. Nicholas never talked about the people watching him, never acknowledged the danger that had drawn her into his world in the first place. And she didn't push because deep down, she didn't want to hear anything that would make her question them. But the illusion of safety shattered the night she overheard Daniel in Nicholas's office. She hadn't meant to listen. She had been heading down the hall when she heard the low murmur of voices, Daniel's sharp tone cutting through the quiet. "They know about her, Nicholas. This isn't just about you anymore." Silence. Then Nicholas's voice, measured but tense. "I know." Lily's stomach twisted. She stepped closer, pressing herself against the wall just outside the door. Daniel sighed. "Are you willing to risk her for this? Because that's what you're doing." Another pause. Then quieter, more raw, "I won't let anything happen to her." Lily's heart clenched. She turned away before she could hear more, her mind racing. Nicholas was keeping things from her. He thought he was protecting her, but all he was doing was making her realize how much she didn't know. And despite the fear curling in her chest, she wasn't going anywhere. The next evening, Nicholas took her to his penthouse, a place that had slowly started to feel like home. The city stretched out beyond the windows, endless and glittering. But Lily wasn't thinking about the view, she was thinking about him. Nicholas stood by the bar, pouring them both a drink, his sleeves rolled up, the top buttons of his shirt undone. He looked at ease, but she knew better. She crossed the room, slipping her arms around his waist from behind. He stilled for a fraction of a second before exhaling, resting his hands over hers. "You're quiet tonight," he murmured. She hesitated. "I heard you and Daniel." Nicholas tensed. Lily swallowed. "Why didn't you tell me?" He turned in her arms, his expression guarded. "Because I didn't want you to worry." She met his gaze, searching. "But I am worried, Nicholas. I don't care about the money, the power, none of it matters to me." "But you do." Something flickered in his eyes, something raw, unguarded. He cupped her face, his thumb tracing her cheek. "I know," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "And that terrifies me." Lily blinked. "Why?" His lips curved, but it wasn't a smirk, it was something softer. "Because I don't know what I'd do if I lost you," her breath hitched. He kissed her then, slow and deep, like he was trying to memorize the feel of her, the taste of her. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the danger, not the uncertainty, just them. When they finally pulled apart, Nicholas rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he murmured, the words slipping out like a confession he had been holding back for too long. Lily's heart nearly stopped. For a split second, she forgot how to breathe. Then, without hesitation, she whispered, "I love you too." Nicholas exhaled sharply, pulling her closer as if he never wanted to let go, and maybe, just maybe, he never would. Nicholas held Lily like he was afraid she might slip through his fingers, his arms tightening around her as if he could shield her from the world. The weight of his confession lingered between them, something fragile yet unbreakable. She had said it back, "I love you too," and he felt it settle deep in his chest, the kind of truth that left no room for doubt. But the world wasn't done testing them yet. A knock at the door shattered the quiet moment. Nicholas tensed instantly, his body going rigid. Lily felt it too, the shift, the underlying tension that never truly left him. Daniel's voice carried through the heavy door. "Nicholas, we have a problem." Lily pulled back just enough to look at him, searching his face. He exhaled, pressing a quick kiss to her forehead before stepping away and opening the door. Daniel walked in, his expression grim. Calloway made a move. Lily's stomach twisted at the mention of the man who had warned her, the man who had looked at her like she was nothing more than a pawn. Nicholas's jaw clenched. "What did he do?" Daniel hesitated for only a moment. "He's trying to tank the deal you've been working on. He's spreading rumors that you're distracted, that you've lost control." His gaze flickered to Lily, unreadable. "That she's the reason." Lily's breath caught. Nicholas's expression darkened, but his voice remained dangerously even. "He's wrong." Daniel nodded. "Then prove it." Lily knew what this meant. Nicholas's world was built on power, on control. If Calloway convinced enough people that Nicholas was vulnerable, that he was slipping, everything he had built would be at risk. Nicholas turned to her, his expression softer now but no less determined. "I have to handle this." Lily nodded. "Then do it." His brows furrowed slightly. "You're not afraid?" She stepped closer, reaching for his hand. "Not of this." "Not of you?" Something flickered in his eyes, something raw, something that told her she had just given him exactly what he needed. Nicholas cupped her face, his thumb brushing over her cheek. "Stay here, I'll come back to you." Lily swallowed past the tightness in her throat. "Always." And then he was gone. Nicholas didn't hesitate. He walked into Calloway's office with the kind of confidence that made people step aside without question. The older man looked up from his desk, a satisfied smirk already playing at his lips. "Nicholas," Calloway mused, leaning back in his chair. "I was wondering when you'd come." Nicholas didn't bother with pleasantries. "You made a mistake." Calloway chuckled, unbothered. "Did I?" Nicholas stepped closer, his presence a quiet storm. "You think love makes me weak, but you don't understand, do you? You've spent your life using people, breaking them down. You've never had someone willing to stand beside you." Calloway's smirk faltered just slightly. Nicholas leaned in, his voice lower now, more dangerous. "Lily doesn't make me weak. She makes me unstoppable." The older man's expression hardened. Nicholas straightened, adjusting his cufflinks with effortless precision. "If you think you can take me down, go ahead and try. But you'll fail, because unlike you, I don't stand alone." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Calloway sitting in the wake of his words. When Nicholas returned to the penthouse, Lily was waiting. The moment she saw him, relief flooded her features. He barely had time to say anything before she was in his arms, holding onto him like she never wanted to let go. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "He won't touch us again." Lily pulled back just enough to look at him. "You're sure?" Nicholas nodded. I made sure of it. She exhaled slowly, pressing a hand to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. Good. His lips quirked into a small smile, but there was something else in his gaze now, something lighter, freer. Come away with me, Lily blinked. What? Nicholas brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Let's leave, just for a little while, no business, no games, just us. Her heart fluttered. Where? Anywhere you want. Lily searched his face, seeing nothing but sincerity. She smiled. Okay. Nicholas grinned, then a rare, breathtaking thing. And then he kissed her, slow and deep, sealing the promise between them. 2 weeks later, they were on a private beach, the ocean stretching endlessly before them. The world felt quiet here, the weight of everything they had been through nothing more than a distant memory. Lily sat beside Nicholas on the sand, her head resting against his shoulder. I never thought my life would look like this. Nicholas tangled his fingers with hers. Do you regret it? She turned to him, her heart full. Not for a second. His expression softened, something like awe flickering in his eyes. Marry me. Lily's breath caught. Nicholas squeezed her hand, his voice steady. I don't need a perfect moment. I don't need a grand speech. I just need you. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she smiled, pressing a kiss to his knuckles. Yes, Nicholas exhaled, like he had been holding his breath. And then he pulled her into his arms, holding her close, holding her safe. No more pretenses, no more games, just them. And it was enough. It was everything.